Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, they always say that good TV and good cinema is supposed to be an immersive experience, but this is kind of taking it all to a very, very different level. And, you know, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. If you are, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we'd absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the Letterboxd, we're on the TikTok, and you know what? I even think we're on Tumblr at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So do us that kindness and pay us a visit. On this episode, we got another interesting one. We are diving into the world of the past. Of a sort. It's a docuseries brought to us from our friends over at Apple TV. It's called Prehistoric Planet 2, and it is a I want to say 5-part, but it is it's a really interesting sort of docuseries from Jon Favreau and the producers of Planet Earth, and it kind of combines wildlife filmmaking with sort of the latest of what we understand of paleontology, and when they put these together, we're really getting to see, probably as close as humanly possible, what some of these magnificent dinosaurs and creatures looked like so many million years ago, in sort of these very unique environments, and it makes for such a beautifully immersed experience. It is a gorgeous piece of work, and it would not be that nearly as good if not for the visual effects and sort of the the photorealistic creations that the VFX teams come up with a show on like this. And we had the unique pleasure of talking to one of the minds behind all that, Mr. Elliot Newman, who him and his team are responsible for not only this, but shows like Lion King, Jungle Book, and I mean so many other things. It's such an immersive and gorgeous piece of television that allows us not only sort of the educational aspect of it all, to get sort of really deep into how these creatures existed back then, but to really see them and experience them. They don't feel two-dimensional or flat at all. What Elliot and his VFX teams have done is really make these creatures come to life in a way that we have never ever seen before. And we sat down and talked with Elliot just to talk about the ins and outs of VFX and just sort of the creations for this show and so very much more. But if I haven't already sold you, please go watch Prehistoric Planet 2 on Apple TV+. But first, enjoy our talk with Elliot, because quite frankly, like I said, it's a darn good one. But yeah, the kid in me really loved this show, I'm not going to lie. Dinosaurs are fun. Yeah, I think you'll have fun too. First off, just thank you so much for the time today, man. Congrats on your work on the show, man. It blew me away.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was a great show. Great show to be involved in. It was 3 years of my life, but very much 3 years well spent. It was a really interesting project.
Well, no, I mean, that's kind of dovetails into my first question, because when you're going as photorealistic as this, I mean, obviously it almost kind of feels like you're leveling up. Like, where do you start in the process for all this? Is it research? Is it just trying to sort of render what it's supposed to look like these dinosaurs are supposed to look like? I mean, I'm kind of curious where you build from on something like that.
I mean, I certainly couldn't have done it on my own. That's for sure. You know, the first thing is you obviously have to have a big team behind you.
Of course.
So that's the first thing I'd say. Obviously, not just the visual effects team, but we had, huge collaboration with BBC Natural History team, and especially Darren Naish, the lead paleontologist, who was also then backed up by a group of scientists and consultants on his end. And they really kind of gave us the blueprints, really, in terms of the science and the sort of the accuracy and the reality of what these things look like, how they moved. We can animate any creature, any fantasy creature. We can animate realistic lions, but there was a certain way that a triceratops would walk that we had to portray, and it had to be accurate based on our understanding of what how these creatures moved, and the anatomy, what the footprints show in terms of the gait, and all of these things were sort of, we would traditionally, in terms of animation, we would look at a lot of things that exist. If you're producing a human, then you do all sorts. If you're producing a digital actor, you do all sorts of scans and reference recordings, and you can get super technical. But it's all about portraying all those nuances of that performer, and you're referencing it as an animator. You're sort of, I'm saying animator, but it's kind of an extension of the flex team. It's all about finding a point of reference, or if it's a lion, for example, you're studying lots and lots of footage of lions in sort of real-time slow motion. You're studying high resolution pictures. You're all of these things come together to kind of inform what it is you're trying to replicate. And obviously the difference here is that these are dinosaurs, they don't exist anymore. So all of that stuff is dependent on, or the fossil records. What have we got, that's sort of grounded in, this is how big the structure of the skeleton is of a triceratops. That's a fact. That's the skeletal. But also, how do you bridge the things we don't know, like how big are the scales on the skin, or what sort of pattern and coloration is on the skin? How may they have moved? These things you kind of have to use. We kind of had to use more so on this series than before. We relied on that guidance from the science and from specifically Darren Naish to kind of tell us, based on the studies, based on our knowledge, this is how a triceratops would walk. This is based on what he would call, what is called phylogenetic bracketing, which is a way of saying, how do we correlate modern day animals so that we can sort of have an educated guess as to maybe a Hatzegopteryx had this type of patterning on its bill. You're kind of using modern day examples and species to say, with reasonable assumptions, we can say that they probably did this, or they probably behaved in this particular way. So it was, the collaboration, the team, that was obviously a massive part of it. And it was just an iterative process, the development of each dinosaur, and in terms of the modeling, the individual scale details on the skin, if it had fur, if it had feathers, how it moved, how it might have behaved. All of these things were just sort of, a collaboration that we just every day and every week we would just sit together as a group, both from the visual effects side and Darren, and with the natural history team at the BBC, and we'd say, how do we want to portray this? How do we want to tell this story? How can we portray it in a way that's realistic? And so it was kind of like, it was almost like a continuous loop, because for Darren, he was sort of also experiencing us bringing these things back. We're kind of bringing them back to life. He's like seeing these creatures and these things in more reality than he's ever seen before. So it was almost like a kind of interesting cycle of feedback that he would then respond to that and sort of give us guidance based on what he's seeing for the first time too, but also using all the sort of the background and the study that obviously he brings to the table. So that was what made it really interesting. It wasn't just about what an individual can do and sort of the artistry someone can bring. Obviously we have that, but we aren't trying to. This isn't your typical Hollywood entertainment show. This is like, no, this is a factual thing. We want to be accurate. We want this to be done in a way that respects the science and respects, our current thinking of what these things look like, how they behaved, and do it in a way that the audience is convinced that what they're looking at is actually footage. We've gone back in time with the time machine and we've literally filmed this thing. And so to produce that, yes, you need a strong visual effects team, but you also need the documentary filmmakers, the experts from the natural history unit. You need paleontology. The science needs to be really, really good and accurate. So there's a huge collaboration from all sides, really.
It really does feel like this job comes down to, almost a lot of number crunching and a lot of science, because I can imagine even when you're dealing with sort of how the feathers on the creature would react if a gust of wind goes by, or lighting or shadow. And I'm kind of curious, like, is this all sort of created in team, or like when we see sort of the environments that they're in, is there a team out shooting that and then you mat in the
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So most of the backgrounds and the environments that you see in the series, not all of them, but most of them have been filmed on real locations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we basically start the process. We have a rough story in mind that's usually sort of put together as a storyboard or an animatic. So we have a rough idea of length. Then we get into the previous process, which is, it's kind of similar to the storyboarding where it's kind of drafty, but it's in 3D. So everything's animated, there's proper camera moves, but it's all digital. That's done in a sort of draft mode. We then look at that, cut it up at editorial. That's kind of where the documentary side comes in, because we kind of, in that previs process, we have effectively these master clips of animation. So we'll have like, say a river crossing might take a couple of minutes of animation. And when you're shooting that as a documentary filmmaker, which is what we're trying to be authentic, you would basically go and you're recording something that's happening. So the previs was done in that way. It was animators animating these really long. Typically, animators will animate 5 seconds for a shot and then move on to the next shot. Whereas this is more like we're going to animate a minute or two, and then we're going to put a camera on that based on where we might have been if this was something we were seeing in the real world. You then take that into the editorial, you cut it into your story, you figure out what your shots are. Then you go on to the location, you shoot your plates based on that. So you already kind of have a pretty well, versed version of the sequence you want to, the story, what the environment is, where in the world you need to be. Is it snowing? Is it a desert environment? So you kind of pre-plan all of that stuff. And then the photography is obviously just empty, but you've kind of got the previs to give you a guidance. So, okay, this is a shot of a T-Rex and it's moving from left to right, and you know how fast the camera needs to move. So you kind of use that as a guide to film your real life locations.
Is a show like this a different beast from your perspective compared to maybe one of your other credits, like say, Godzilla? Like, what are the differences on something like that to this? Because just in watching the show, it definitely feels like, as you said before, obviously it takes a village to get this stuff, but it's not just the filmmaking, it's not just the science, it's math, it's just sort of really sort of understanding so many different elements that come into play to make these dinosaurs look as fantastic as they do.
I think it's just respecting a lot of the nuances, it's respecting the detail and very, very different. Godzilla, very different type of show. Obviously, that was done a number of years ago. We've through the years evolved, I would say, as well with our productions. We've been fortunate to work with Jon Favreau on The Jungle Book and The Lion King, as have I. And so these things have almost kind of been a way to hone our craft as well, and sort of understand, okay, every time we take these projects on, like how do we really take it to the next level? How do we take it up a notch? We want this thing to be, so believable that you don't think about it being, that's kind of the key of visual effects. You're trying to be invisible. You don't want people really talking about the visual effects. It's more like, we want people to talk about the story and be absorbed by it and just accept what they're looking at is real. And so that's kind of, what really inspires me anyway, in terms of just trying to understand, like, for example, going back to Godzilla, we've got a whole new rendering system that we've developed in terms of like how we render hair, for example. That didn't exist for us, when we did Godzilla, and that's because we've done the Jungle Book and the Lion King, and now this, and so it kind of gives us a way to kind of develop and sort of enhance how we're doing things, and to a point where we're literally studying. We're even becoming scientists as well, and say, well, let's study melanin and how melanin, works at sort of the pigmentation of hairs and things like that. So we kind of really get into the nuances of the details, and it's sort of across the board. Really, is that how do you make something more realistic when it's already pretty good to start with? Well, you kind of just chip away at it. You start drilling a bit deeper each time, and obviously as technology evolves, you can do that as well. You can push things a little bit further because the tech allows you to. Software advancements, hardware advancements help, but also just artistry and just having a group of very talented people that you've worked with for years is also a massive bonus, because everyone's been on that same journey together, so we can all sort of bounce off that experience.
Are you basically going back to school every 3-4 years just in how the technology evolved? Because I mean, I can imagine, especially on your end,
it is hard to keep up. Yeah, there's so much obviously GPU rendering is the new thing now. There's a lot of talk about real-time engines and bringing path tracing to the GPU, and it is, you have to stay on top of it because things move and evolve so quickly. Obviously, the current buzzword is AI, and what that means for us as practitioners, and how can we leverage that. There's already AI denoisers, because noise is a problem for rendering engines, and in terms of sometimes renders take 100 hours a frame. How do you cut that down? Well, AI could potentially help with that. So there's it is fascinating, and you do have to keep on top of it, because things do change and move on very quickly.
Is this, like, working in this side of the industry, it feels like you can't come to it with just one skill set. Like, if you had to sort of give someone advice who wants to get into the visual effects business, like, is there something you would say, or is it just maybe keeping an open mind to sort of everything that's out there? Because I mean, again, just in seeing something like this, even just from a technical standpoint, like, I'm in awe of a show like Prehistoric Planet just because it looks so goddamn good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's tricky. I'd say that it's probably the same advice it's always been. Really, is you it depends a little bit. There's lots of different entry points. If you want to get into film or high-end visual effects, you're always typically better specializing in a certain area and getting really good at that.
Yeah.
And then sort of going into that. So for me, it was modeling. I was came from more of an art background, and that's kind of my entry point. In just sort of honed my craft in that regard, and then as I sort of developed in my career, I touched on all the other areas of production. I'd say that's still pretty decent advice to go off today. I don't think as much has changed in terms of the fact that if you look at most big visual effects facilities, they are looking at people that specialize in certain areas. You're an animator, you're an asset person, you're a texture artist, you definitely have areas of skill, and that's because it's kind of difficult to kind of do it all and be really good at everything.
Right.
I'd say if you're more in the sort of commercial side, or lower end production, being more of a generalist is probably the way to go, because that's a little bit more run and gun, where it's like kind of every skill counts. You've got shorter turnaround times, and but for film, high-end film visual effects and the high-end episodic visual effects, I'd say try and within the spectrum of CGI and VFX, try and figure out what is it that you want to sort of specialize in.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a whole career. It's like it could be just that's just the first 5 years. You just get good at that. Be disciplined, get good at that specific thing, and then you grow from there, and then you can bridge into other things that interest you. But typically that's how it works, and I don't think that's going to really massively change in the short term anyway.
That's cool. I mean, I definitely see that. Now, I mean, just to put a bow on this, was there a movie or a show that young Elliot saw back in the day that had the light bulb go off in your artistry brain and go, I want to do that?
I loved Jurassic Park.
Of
Probably
course.
the one I'd say, of course.
This is your
full,
life's work then.
full, full circle. So that one, Terminator 2, Terminator 1, 2,
For
they were
sure.
great. But I'd say Jurassic Park was probably the one that made me go, oh, this is really cool. So yeah, funny.
Love it.
Yeah.
Elliot, man, keep up the good work, keep up the hard work, man, because honestly, I mean, even with Lion King and I mean in this show, just what we're getting to see on screen is just absolutely mind-blowing. And I mean, I'm loving it and I know audiences are loving it. But I mean, again, man, thank you for the work and thank you so much for the time today.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, David.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.